have to.
Yes, of course, yes, I have them. Yeah, seriously.
So I just want.
Hang on, yes,
okay. So I just want to continue about the question that you asked. You said was Eric's action was justifiable, and then there is another question that came to my mind: is what qualifies justified action? So we have to answer that first, and then.
Yeah, and that was the quest. So our quest was to look for a criteria that would help us justify one, or to some measure justify one, and to a lesser measure justify the other one, so that we can distinguish between the two.
Okay.
So the problem is not to dismiss everything altogether, and I think it's not an easy exercise, but I think it's one that we have to know if we want to be skeptical of religion and want to promote religious tolerance at the same time.
So I'm just want to kind of somehow switch to another topic which is relevant to religion. I think the strongest sense of inhuman that defines a human is sense of identity, and also the sense of survival. So even if you go to crazy guys in the street, they have a sense of survival. It's like it's very strong in human, and also identity. And I think somehow, so the runner, to able to win, gives an identity to the runner. It defines him, so it helps his survival. And I think that religious beliefs is actually make that happen. So it's kind of it's a positive feedback. So religious beliefs makes his identity more bold, and he feels better about himself, and consequently he thinks that the religious is good things. So in that sense, because it makes him a better person, it's justifiable. But we can go to other examples that a religious beliefs makes somebody a worse person, or even surrounding the people that he or she interacts, miserable situation. That's not justifiable.
Religious being only these two, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So
because the identity, survival I get, but identity I don't think comes out from only these two. Like to establish religion identity, you have to have more conditions.
no, I mean a sense of existence, sense of existing in the world, right? So, so for some people, I mean, for example, in Saudi Arabia, Islam and identity is the same. You cannot take Islam from a Saudi man and say, oh, they just lose the anchor in the world, in the universe. That's their identity.
Yeah.
So
So you have a picture of the world that religion provides for you.
Exactly.
And
it gives you comfort.
Yes, it does. But that comfort is only justified, I think, in the face of suffering, which has these conditions. I think otherwise you have to question it. And we are okay. So the target of this talk, or the target of this, is people who are. Well, it's not you guys because okay. So it is you guys and it's not, but it is you guys in the context of this movie. Because the movie was supposed to, I know some of you are really skeptical fans, but the movie is supposed to inspire that, okay, there is some power in religious belief. And to ignore that power completely is to stay skeptical on everything. But to stay skeptical on everything in one aspect of life and not on others is also contradictory. But notice that a lot of our beliefs, a lot of our day-to-day beliefs are based on this. Like, the example that I was going to use was, anybody's been to Australia? You have? Okay, well, we already have a good example. But I have never had anybody going to Australia. And I just thought there is this island, big island. Right? And I read it on the maps and everything. But I had a friend who went to Australia just 2 days ago and had a picture of a kangaroo. He's posted on his Facebook. I liked it, and I made a joke, replied, and I knew he was in Australia, right? So before that, I was just, my belief was working. I was certain that there is Australia, right? But I never, it wasn't knowledge. It was never knowledge. But that didn't stop me from believing that there is Australia, right? None of us, a few of us, maybe some of us have, we're fortunate enough to have, but only a few of us have traveled around the world. Or even if we have, we haven't really perceived the world as like not flat, right? But you always see the world as sort of flat, right? It's really awkward to think that the world is gonna. You have to be really careful when you talk about this stuff. I mean, to say that the world is spherical is to already impose scientific belief into thinking. Like, but we don't act as if the world is spherical, right? So this is the careful thinking that I'm talking about. So to be skeptical, and this is what I want to get across, right? I think religious belief is justified. It's not religious belief. Some sort of faith-based view is justified. I still think it's justified under these conditions. And who else wants to go?
Okay.
I think Sirius wants to go.
Connie and then Nancy.
Yeah. I've been told I'm a very sloppy thinker, so excuse me, my apologies starting out.
It's just like it's.
I think that Eric had no choice but to not run on a Sunday, because his religion is made up of this true belief. And in those days, if you allow one exception, the whole house of cards comes apart. There can be no reason to make an exception in his world. I don't think Harold is running for religious reasons at all. There's nothing in the film that tells us that he's religious. He's a cultural Jew. He says, my father's from Lithuania, and he's trying very hard to become British, he says, over and over. Gilbert and Sullivan is the sort of most British kind of operetta that there is, and he's a fan. He says to the Gilgood, I forget what his name is, the guy, the dean of the school, I am English. He's not English, and he'll never be English. And what I found was he eats pig's feet, right, in the restaurant, and you don't see him doing anything religious. He doesn't wear a yarmulke. So I think your premise, setting up these two guys as religious, is questionable.
But
the other thing that's really
still
interesting in terms of religion is that Eric is a Presbyterian. He's a Scot. He's not Church of England. And Harold isn't Church of England either. And so you've got, but in Church of England is the authorized religion in England. So you've got these two outsiders who are both going to run for England and who are both outside. And when Sam says in the letter, you're running for us, Sam is an Arab Italian. And so there's a whole different theme, which is sort of the outsiders running, which I think.
And that is a good point. I actually thought about bringing that up, but I thought it'll confuse my point, because no, you know why? Because if the question of ethnicity and minority is a good issue, but I think it distances us away from the point that I wanted to get across, because it's true they are both under suffering, but I think as much power as religious belief has, I think the urge to question stuff and curiosity has as much power, and we can blame people on that. You know what I mean? But we cannot blame people on having forced to do something. You're right. I don't think Eric had a choice on whether or not to run on Sunday. But he did have a choice. Some very religious people, when faced with suffering, when faced with certain choices, they suddenly switch. There are many cases of Sufis, and I think there are even atheists who switch and become Catholics.
But it's a total switch.
Yeah, and even if you look at the works of those skeptics before, it's not philosophical thinking. It's belief in remaining in skeptic. It's this one basically, which is just another belief. it's not, it's, no, and Sears highlighted another point which was good about Descartes. The viewpoint that I'm promoting would collapse that distinction between, because it makes everything not subjective, but it makes everything dependent on the action. But it still attempts to establish a criteria, and that criteria is a very simple one. It's the very commonsensical view that you should remain open to different options and balance the curiosity that comes from doubting and the belief that comes from attaching yourself to a faith-based or a faith-like view.
Thank you. Nassim next, and raise your hand if you want to ask questions.
Siavash, it's interesting. Even your philosophical point of view comes from knowledge and scientific point of view. Even if you want to be skeptical about belief. Well, for me, if I get back again to your question on the justified guy, I may not say that the belief is justified, but the action is. So, and you were talking also about that, the action is justifiable, not, it's the belief that leads up to an action. It's the action that's important. Was it that action?
It's how the belief plays out in the action. So if the way that the belief plays out in the action goes in a way that closes your options, then it's not justifiable.
Okay.
But if the word is...
Stop there.
Yeah.
So there is this choice thing. When we talk about choice, exactly this belief or this whole structure you're talking about belief, just we have to decide. Because
The whole structure about...
Because when you're talking about choice, you are giving me skeptical. If I'm gonna say, if I say I believe in this, I don't have any choice. I believe in something and I just stuck to that choice. That belief, even it's not a choice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, if I say that I am a believer, so I am saying that I couldn't be a skeptical. I shouldn't look at anything else. I believe in something and I stop there, and this is it. This is the whole world of mine.
Yeah, but that's only justified in these contexts, because even then you have to balance between, not accepting nothing. So it's not that the action, so in the case of the climber, it's not the action it's not the person that justifies the belief for himself or herself. It's how it plays out that should be seen as justified because of the situation that she or he is in.
Yeah, that's the action.
You know what I mean?
we're
It's
talking about.
basically,
That's the belief
I wanted to avoid the term contextualism because I don't want to get into relativist arguments, but it's close to that. But it's setting a criteria. It's not saying everything depends on the context. You know what I mean? So
No.
do you have...
Okay, listen, I know you have a lot of questions, but we will take 2 more questions and then we go to Q&A, which give us more freedom. So,
Yeah, question. You're not arguing.
You're arguing.
Yes, okay, you're arguing. Okay, you want to continue, both? Okay, Nassim,
I don't mind if other people-
just keep in mind that there are 2 more. Right? Keep in
No,
mind.
I just stopped here.
Okay, we can continue
First
this.
of all, I want to thank you.
Yes.
Because this is a really good, basic thing to think about. I really love
Yeah,
thinking about
it's
those
tough.
things.
It's tough, and
I have a comment.
Sure, of course. Siruz and then Wahid, and then we're going to go to Q&A. Okay, Siruz?
I think there's a distinct difference between tolerance and critical thinking and pure philosophical discourse. Definitely, everyone wants to be tolerant and everyone wants to have an open mind. It's something that we all strive towards. But at the same time, when you're having a philosophical discourse, you have made up your mind in a certain way, which later on you can change it.
Yep.
But you've made up your mind and you're having a discourse with a person. So that doesn't mean that when I'm discussing something, I don't want to be critical or I don't want to be open-minded. But at the same time, I'm giving my opinion. Now, In regards to the action that you mentioned, see, one of the important things about a priority is that you don't have to prove it. That's the tricky thing that Descartes brought. Just like the beautiful example he has that he says the first a priori is I think therefore I am. That's a priori.
Yeah, but it has to be intuitive, right?
Yeah, but intuitive is
sit
very
well, you know?
It's sit well is very subjective. So
It is,
So,
and
so
that's
what,
the problem with
Okay,
a priori.
what I'm getting at is that a belief that is a priori doesn't need action. Therefore, the person doesn't need to jump. You see what I'm getting
Yeah,
at?
no, I see. But you're still presupposing a priori over belief. So you're saying the person who holds a belief and has faith in it, she will have faith in it
Without
because,
action.
yeah, because she holds it a priori.
Okay, they can have action, but they
Yeah.
cannot have action also.
Yeah.
So if
Yeah,
there's
but
no action,
even that person, in a normal situation, she would be wrong. But if you put her in that situation, then she is justified in believing in God and making the jump. You know what I mean?
The word wrong for me is very, I don't know.
Let's
what
call
wrong
it
is.
justified and unjustified. How's that? Like, do you think she is justified in making
Because I'm
the
not
jump?
afraid to be relativist either. I
I'm not afraid.
kind of feel a lot of people are afraid to go into that.
I'm very afraid.
I'm not.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Last question, and then we're going to go to Q&A. Wahid.
I think you have mentioned the string theory. Did I hear you correctly?
Yes,
It's
yes.
something crazy.
I said it's not intuitive.
So it's interesting for me to see because you are your major is philosophy, and I would like to hear the angle you are looking at it, and how would you say that? Although I'm not
From like the angle on scientific theories?
the way you look at the string theory, because you mentioned it's
Sure.
it's
So
crazy
string
thing.
theory
Okay,
is
I also
basically
think
that it's the reduction of reality to vibrations of.
strings.
Well, it's not strings. The string itself is a vibration. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's when you talk about reality, you have to think really like even more carefully than what you're thinking right now. So this string is there so that we can think about it as vibrating, but the vibration itself is the string in string theory, because these are not
It's a
real.
theory, it's not-
Yes, these are not real things. They're equations on the board, right? So even the God particle was an equation on the board, right? So to look at it as a theory of science is usually to believe that that the theory is right because everything that science says is right until proven otherwise, right? But the problem with but usually I know we want to be skeptical, but pardon?
You have to go deductively, but it
Yes,
doesn't mean
yeah,
that
yeah.
everything they say.
But science has given us a lot of things. So it's not crazy to say that science is right a lot of times. Now, scientific view may not
It's
be right.
relatively right. Then it could be wrong.
Yeah, it could be wrong. It's right
Later
unless
on, it
proven
could be
otherwise,
wrong.
right? So even if we view science as true, if it plays out right, it starts to work better. You know what I mean? So string theory doesn't explain. Let me just give you a better example on science. So, okay, I'll just say this and I'll add a comment to it later. So in 3,000 years ago, for sailors to think that the world was flat gave them enough resources to navigate through the sea. And when they had problems, scientific theories of the time tried to justify the flatness of the world. And they did, and it worked. It worked for them. But eventually the theories that the scientists used to explain the Earth got more convoluted. But you can think about it, you can think that the math got more convoluted, and it was not as simple to accept it. And suddenly somebody came up and said, world is a circle or a sphere, right? And then the theory just collapsed into simpler, more efficient equations. And people adapted those equations. this is to say that science is relative, but it is also to say that we have measures of efficiency, measures of accuracy. We have these broad, vague pictures of how the world should look to us that governs our understanding of our theories. String theory versus the God particle theory. They're both theories that explain a segment of reality. But one has a complicated math, the other one has a simpler math, although they're both like uberly complicated. So one of them gets implemented in CERN's lab, the other one is getting forgotten. String theory is getting forgotten, and people say it's a pity, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's not a pity because it's really expensive to implement it. So that's my view, and I think so belief in science is the same thing. Now science doesn't get there because we don't talk about science, because the scientist never goes from here to here. Scientists would stick to this.
And they stick there forever.
Yes, stick there forever. But a scientist does not ever get into that position. Like a chemist does not have to, the chemist does not have to make a quick decision. The chemist he has time to modify his theory, right? But the world is not always a comfortable place. Like we've been living after the world wars, at least, in a relatively more comfortable position. Like at least the North Americans have been living in a more comfortable position. So this idea is forgotten, but for people who are in harsher situations that are imposed on them, they don't question a lot of stuff. You make a belief and you move on. And in a lot of those situations, a lot of those beliefs, at least in that context, the belief has to be justified. Because to say that the belief is not justified is to deprive that person of the choice, is to condemn the climber to die, basically. and yeah.
Okay. So let's clap for Siavash.